Hello and Ram Ram everyone. It has been a while since I uploaded a video. All I can say is sorry. I initially took a break to deal with certain in real life commitments, but one thing led to another and I never got the time to create and upload videos. That has changed now. I have managed to come up with a schedule that should keep the content flowing on a regular basis. Let's speak briefly about this particular video. To say that J Sai Deepak caused some controversy recently would be an understatement. But what I found more interesting was how many people, supporters and detractors, had never actually read the books he's published. You see, his books have sort of become the new Moby Dick of the Indian non-fiction world. Everyone and their mother has bought a copy. They all rave about how brilliant it is, and when you push a little, you discover they never made it past the first page. I suspect the reason for this is sentence construction and vocabulary. Perhaps it's his training as a lawyer, or perhaps it's just the way he writes. What I have learned from asking a few people about their experience of his books is that they don't understand a thing the first time they read a sentence, and it takes them multiple tries just to get through a single page. One person told me how he would read a sentence, get confused, refer to a dictionary, read the sentence again, and get even more confused. It's why I decided to do this explainer series where we break down and understand each subsection of the book together. Let me be clear at the outset. I don't have an opinion on J Sai Deepak as a person because I don't know him personally. I won't be passing moral judgments here. If you're looking for that, I'm sorry to disappoint you. A few points to keep in mind before we start. Keep a pen and paper nearby. When I ask you to write something down, please pause the video and write it down. It will make understanding the video easier. I tend to speak quickly. If it's too fast for you, please use the settings wheel and slow the video down. Hindi is not my first language or my second language. So if I make any errors while speaking Hindi, please accept my apologies in advance. I will add timestamps to these videos. This should help with those of you who like to consume my videos over a period of a few days. Please note that I am trying to simplify someone else's work. I've tried my best to be accurate and include key information. If something is lost in the process, it's not out of malice. Lastly, I'd like to thank my subscribers who kept asking for a new video in the comment section of my tweets. You're the reason this video is happening. So truly, thank you. With that, let's get into the video. The start of the chapter begins with J Sai Deepak examining the response of the national media to his arguments in the Sabrimala case. I'll link the video of him explaining his arguments in the comment section of this video. In his opinion, most news outlets did not make an honest effort to understand what he was saying. Most of them preferred running headlines and write-ups that were attention-grabbing or clickbait rather than attempt to explain his position. While insults like patriarchal didn't really grab his attention, what he did find interesting were words like orthodox, traditional, anti-rational, and anti-modern being used to attack an argument that supported a religious position. Based on this observation, he asks several important questions that I've broken up into parts and subparts to make it easier to digest. Is it a religious institution's commitment first and foremost to the basis for its establishment? यहाँ basis का अर्थ आधार है. In the case of a temple, isn't this commitment first and foremost to the basis or आधार of its pran pratishtha and worship? Isn't this basis or आधार A, the deity or Devi Devata, and B, the related practices and traditions? If the answer to the question is yes, why are words like traditional being used as an insult? Surely it is well known that a temple will follow its traditions and by extension is traditional. निश्चित रूप से यह सामान्य ज्ञान है कि एक मंदिर अपनी परंपराओं का पालन करेगा और एक मंदिर स्वभाव से पारंपरिक है. In case it still isn't clear, the point is मंदिर की प्रतिबद्धता मंदिर के देवी देवता और उनसे जुड़े हुए परंपरा एवं प्रणालियों से है. Does this mean that certain words have acquired what we would call double meaning, or as Sai Deepak puts it, secondary significance? If yes, then shouldn't we further explore and better understand this double meaning or secondary significance? J Sai Deepak says that he began to dig deeper into the colonial roots of the double meaning of these words. In many of the public debates he took part in after he had presented his Sabrimala arguments. These are the very debates you see clips of on the internet today. He says that it is only after he was introduced to literature, that is reading material, on coloniality and colonial consciousness that he was able to understand the basis for this double meaning. Additionally, he was also able to clearly talk about the relationship between coloniality, modernity, and rationality. This is because the reading material gave him a framework to help define this relationship. I understand this can be a little confusing, so let's make it simple via an example. Most of you have grown up Hindu. Now imagine for a moment that you're not Hindu. You're a Polish man or woman who can't even say Bharat properly. You only have a rough idea of what Hinduism is. To explore Hinduism, what would you need to do? Read more about the Hindu faith, right? Read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, read the Upanishads or perhaps commentaries on it. What happens after that? You're able to talk about Hinduism with a little more certainty. You understand why certain ideas are so central to Hinduism and what is helping you articulate all this? The literature or reading material. J Sai Deepak is saying this but in a different context. He was vaguely familiar with how colonial influence affected our understanding of certain words. But reading more about the subject helped him talk about this specific topic clearly and with confidence. Also, don't worry if you are confused by terms like coloniality or colonial consciousness. This book will explain these terms as we keep reading. Returning to the explanation, he further continues this point by telling us how reading literature on the subject helped him understand how terms such as modern and rational that people use regularly these days had deeper meaning that one could trace back to the word's European colonial origin. He also makes the point that these terms are used by people without serious reflection or gambhir vichar, especially when discussing the modern day importance of Bharat ki Bharatiya Samajik एवं धार्मिक प्रथाएं और सामाजिक संरचनाएं. For my English speaking audience, the meaning of that is Indic social and religious practices and societal structures of Bharat. Now we get to the part most of you have been waiting for, understanding the meaning of coloniality, colonialism and colonization, as well as the history of these terms. First, we start with colonization. To quote the book here, colonization refers to a process or phenomenon by which people belonging to a nation establish colonies in other societies while retaining their bonds with the parent nation and exploit the colonized societies to benefit the parent nation and themselves. और to put it more simply, कंट्री ए के लोग सोसाइटी बी जाते हैं, ये सोसाइटी बी में अपने उपनिवेश या कॉलोनी बना देते हैं. वे अपने आप को कंट्री ए के ही लोग समझते हैं, सोसाइटी बी के नहीं. सोसाइटी बी को वो लूटने लगते हैं ताकि कंट्री ए अपने आप को और अमीर और शक्तिशाली बना पाए. I want you all to pause this video and give me a standing ovation for my excellent Hindi skills.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
J Sai Deepak now tells us the relationship between colonization and colonialism. Pause the video and write these two definitions down. Colonization is the process of establishing colonies. उपनिवेश स्थापित करने की प्रक्रिया. Colonialism is the use of colonization to expand influence. प्रभाव का विस्तार करने के लिए उपनिवेशकरण का उपयोग. He goes on to subcategorize colonialism into 4 distinct forms of colonialism. These are exploitation colonialism, settler colonialism, surrogate colonialism, internal colonialism. In exploitation colonialism, the goal of the colonization is twofold. The first is to generate economic growth for the colonizer. The second is to expand the area under control of the colonizer. Most important of all, this is done without actually settling the colony. That is, the colonizer bringing people over from his country and creating new societies in the colony. In settler colonialism, the people doing the colonization keep their link with the country they originate from. At the same time, they also start creating their own mini societies in the colony by building a permanent residence or sthayi nivas there. They begin taking over all aspects of the colonized society. This means that the natives, that is the people who originally lived there, are reduced to secondary status. We now move on to defining coloniality. Pause the video and write this definition down. Coloniality is the thought process that gives colonialism its shape or form and advances the end goal of colonization. To quote the book, this end goal is colonization of the mind through complete domination of the culture and worldview of the colonized society. Colonized society की संस्कृति और विश्व दृष्टि पर पूर्ण प्रभुत्व के माध्यम से मन का colonization. That's विश्व दृष्टि. I'm sorry, it didn't come out properly. I've seen some people think this is literal mind control. So just in case it isn't clear, colonization of the mind here means the way someone thinks. This is done by controlling the culture of the society being colonized and how they see the world. Please write this down. Coloniality is the source from which the policy of colonialism flows, resulting in colonization. I'll repeat that just one more time. Coloniality is the source from which the policy of colonialism flows, resulting in colonization. The end goal of this colonization is to take the people who are being colonized and make them look, act, talk and think like the colonizer. उन्हें कॉलोनाइजर की तरह देखने, कार्य करने, बात करने और सोचने के लिए मजबूर करना. I think that is. Sorry, once again. While the term cultural coloniality is not used as much as coloniality, it accurately describes the true nature of it. Something that touches almost every aspect of the colonized person's existence. In other words, cultural domination, सांस्कृतिक वर्चस्व. This process of cultural domination can be called colonialization. I repeat that, colonialization. This colonialization is different from the more openly seen processes of colonization. A simple way to think about the difference is by contrasting these two examples. The first example, forcing colonized societies to grow cash crops over their usual crops. Second example, promoting missionary schools. Both of these processes broadly fall under the definition of colonization. Only the second example, however, can be called colonialization. This is because in the first example, what are we concerned with? Generating money for the empire. While in the second example, what are we concerned with? Cultural domination. The world has seen non-European forms of colonization. However, when we read decolonial literature, the word coloniality is used to refer to European colonization most of the time. On this basis, J Sai Deepak says that unless clearly stated otherwise, coloniality means European cultural coloniality and not just cultural coloniality. I've sensed I've lost some of you, so let's break this down together. First, let's understand what we are talking about. Cultural coloniality equals dominating a colonized population's culture. जिन लोगों को आप कॉलोनाइज कर रहे हो उनके कल्चर को डोमिनेट या प्रभुत्व करना. यूरोपियन कल्चरल कलोनियलिटी इक्वल्स यूरोपियंस डूइंग कल्चरल कलोनियलिटी. People get confused because they don't tie such definitions to examples. Please write this down. The easy way to remember what cultural coloniality means is by thinking of the word Gora Saab. Just in case you're confused, I'm telling you to write down the word Gora Saab. Why? This word makes it very easy for you to think of ways in which Indian culture was dominated and even corrupted by cultural coloniality. The path of Tantra being equated to black magic or Kala Jadoo, the mocking of Hindu traditions as regressive or backward, and being shamed for wearing a bindi or tilak. Just remember the word Gora Saab. Decolonial studies में ज़्यादातर ध्यान यूरोपियन लोगों के कॉलोनाइजेशन पर दिया जाता है. इस कारण जे साई दीपक कह रहे हैं कि जब तक अन्यथा न कहा जाए, कलोनियलिटी शब्द का उपयोग ये दर्शाता है कि संभाषण यूरोपियन कल्चरल कलोनियलिटी की हो रही है, केवल कल्चरल कलोनियलिटी की नहीं. Now that we've used the word decoloniality, I'm sure some of you are wondering what it means. Pause the video and write this definition down. Quite simply, decoloniality is, and I'm quoting the book here, the response of erstwhile colonized societies, primarily Latin American, to European cultural coloniality in order to reclaim their agency over their consciousness and subjectivities. Let's simplify this. The response of societies that were previously colonies to European cultural coloniality is decoloniality. The aim or uddesha of the response is to take back control over how people from these once colonized societies see, think and experience the world around them. लोग अपने आसपास की दुनिया को कैसे देखते हैं, सोचते हैं और अनुभव करते हैं, इस पर नियंत्रण वापस लेना. To reclaim the ability to define their own identity. अपनी स्वयं की पहचान को परिभाषित करने की क्षमता पुनः प्राप्त करना. Scholars agree that different societies have the right to define coloniality and decoloniality for themselves based on that specific society's own history and experiences. However, scholars also agree that of all the different sources of colonialism and forms of coloniality, the European variant is the most widespread, has the most range, and has lasted the longest. It continues to influence the societies it once colonized as well as the rest of the world. J Sai Deepak clarifies that when it comes to the literature, that is books and papers, on the subject of European colonialism and coloniality, Western imperialism is included in the discourse. This is because it is seen as the descendant of European colonialism and its successor. Due to this, scholars study both European coloniality as well as its successor, Western imperialism. Together, they are referred to by different names. They are Eurocentrism, Western centrism, Western normativism, North Atlantic abstract universal fictionalism. For now, don't worry too much about the differences. Just remember that Western imperialism is even more indirect in its application as compared to European colonialism. Let's now talk about this Eurocentrism. Please write this down. Eurocentrism equals European coloniality and Western imperialism. Eurocentrism, as you've likely guessed, is something that European colonialism and coloniality produced. Its roots can be traced to what is called the Age of Discovery or Exploration. So what is the Age of Discovery? It is the time period that saw Christopher Columbus set out to discover the non-Christian world in the 15th century, the year 1492 to be exact. This voyage or Abhiyan was the start of European colonization and was the beginning of a new era in European history. It led to the rise of new ways of understanding time, space, and ways of looking at, understanding, and interacting with the world. The consequences or parinam of this development had a huge impact on the continent of Europe and others, matlab the rest of the world. It is said that the Age of Discovery has its roots in something called the Renaissance. This was another time period in European history that began in the 14th century. We are talking about the 1300s in case you're confused. The Age of Discovery overlapped the Renaissance significantly. मतलब the Age of Discovery और the Renaissance ये दोनों कई हद तक एक ही समय सीमा में घटित हुए. The Renaissance के बाद आता है the Reformation. This Reformation eventually led to an event known as the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Quick side note, many consider this treaty to be the end of the Reformation. The Reformation was followed by two chapters of European history that J Sai Deepak calls the zenith of European civilization. These are the Age of Enlightenment or Reason and the Industrial Revolution. So very quickly, the time periods are the Age of Discovery, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution. Notice the use of the word "the" for each of the time periods. The Age of Discovery, the Reformation. J Sai Deepak says that this shows the universalization of European history as the history of humanity. This is especially true for modern history. In simpler words, the शब्द का प्रयोग ये दर्शाता है कि यूरोप का इतिहास मानवता का इतिहास है और ये वाक्य मॉडर्न इतिहास के लिए विशेष रूप से सच है. The rest of the world, which includes societies that were once colonized, accept these two things that originated in Europe between the 1400s and 1800s. The first of them is modernity or modernity. The second is several modern concepts and ideas. They accept these ideas as being obvious without giving it too much thought in an unconscious manner. वे इन विचारों को बहुत अधिक विचार किए बिना स्पष्ट मान लेते हैं. In societies that were once colonies, important conversations at the societal level use these modern concepts and ideas as their base. उन समाजों में जो कभी उपनिवेश थे, सामाजिक स्तर पर महत्वपूर्ण बातचीत इन आधुनिक अवधारणाओं और विचारों को अपने आधार के रूप में उपयोग करती है. These ideas and concepts have greatly affected and even changed how people understand nature, universe, human agency, religion, race, language, political organization of societies, the nature of the state, its relationship with religion, conceptions of law and human rights, treatment of genders, science, notions of development, and more across the globe. When colonization was happening, the narrow European way of looking at the world was imposed on the native populations they were colonizing. This meant that the indigenous worldview of the natives was replaced with the European one. The European worldview became the worldview of the colonized societies. J Sai Deepak says that scholars find the origin point of all this as the Columbus expedition in 1492. His expedition and its importance as a part of world history has caused heated debate. We now explore the different sides of this debate. The word used to describe these sides is school, as in school of thought. Don't get too confused. It just means how certain people think when it comes to this debate. The first school of thought that we explore is the modern school. They believe that the 1492 expedition needs to be seen as an amazing achievement. It was the quote, beginning of the Christian West's destiny to liberate non-Christian indigenous societies from their wretched existence. End quote. The second school of thought is that of the postmodern school. It was created to counter Europe's claim over modernity. Naturally, it rejects the different stories or narratives that the European side uses to explain modernity. This opposition to modernism for the postmodern school is limited mostly to the area of culture. The third school of thought is the post-colonial school. This school of thought shares a lot in common with the postmodern school. They even use postmodern thought in their own analysis. Given that there are so many similarities, it should come as no surprise that they too reject the claims of Eurocentrism that we have just discussed. This is limited to the political realm. Quite curiously, however, this post-colonial school does not break down and examine basic assumptions that are colonial in nature. In fact, it uses the same tools as that of the colonizer. An example of this is how it focuses on the quote-unquote local. It does what the colonizer would do and makes it universal. This is easier to understand with an example. I'm sure you've all either heard about or seen the movie Kantara. Now imagine if someone started saying that the culture of that specific part of Karnataka is applicable to the whole world. Of course, I'm giving you an extreme example, but pay attention to the principle at work here. जो local level पे हो रहा है, मैं उसको पूरे संसार के level पे दबा रहा हूँ. The post-colonial school changes the topics being discussed, what J Sai Deepak calls content of the discussion. However, it is not changing the system of rules, ideas, or beliefs that define how the conversation will happen. What the book calls, quote, terms of engagement or the framework of the discussion, end quote. In other words, the post-colonial school has learned the European habit of universalization. The post-colonial school is not able to see and understand how colonial structures or colonial sanrachnaएं affect societies to this day even after they have achieved independence. To put it in Hindi, post-colonial school यह देखने और समझने में सक्षम नहीं है कि स्वतंत्रता प्राप्त करने के बाद भी कॉलोनियल संरचनाएं वर्तमान समय में समाज को कैसे प्रभावित करती है. As you can guess, this is a big limitation. The fourth school of thought is the decolonial school. Like the post-colonial school, it challenges the European universalisms, especially in the area of politics. Now please write this down. If you're getting constantly confused with what universalization or universalism is, just remember the words European history is Indian history. right? I'm talking about the example we just read, local ko universal banana. Please write this down. Moving on, the decolonial school believes that the Columbus expedition of 1492 was, quote, the beginning of one of the most repressive, bloody, racist and genocidal chapters ever witnessed in human history, end quote. It believes that this expedition killed off many cultures and made them extinct. The expedition ravaged and destroyed nature at a level that had never been seen before. So how is the decolonial school different from the post-colonial school? The answer lies in the school's recognition of the idea of coloniality. It believes that this idea gave form to European colonization, which began with the age of discovery. The decolonial school believes that the culture complex of modernity and rationality, as well as modern categories of religion and race, originated from European coloniality. Let's simplify this. A culture complex is a unique pattern of activities, beliefs, rituals, and traditions related to one central feature of life in a particular culture. In other words, a collection of cultural traits. So, in the case of India, the ideas of modernity and rationality have created in our societies cultural traits that are associated with it. From what we choose to wear, to visiting bars, or even people posting pronouns in their bios, all of them can be traced back to the culture complex of modernity or rationality. Decoloniality says that the post-colonial school leads people to believe that the colonial mindset or consciousness ended with decolonization. This is not true. It has in fact survived decolonization and continues to affect societies that are today considered to be decolonized or independent. The claims of universalism made by supporters of Europeanism are rejected in a much more balanced manner by the decolonial school. How does it do this? When discussing an issue, usually the European position is the standard against which all arguments are judged. The decolonial school rejects this and instead treats the European position or Europe-Rai as one of the many different options that are part of a, quote, global pool of thoughts, end quote. Based on this, it rejects the idea that Europe is the only one who gets to decide how time, space, and subjectivity are thought about and defined. For the sake of simplicity, think of subjectivity as a way of seeing the world based on a person's interaction with it. J Sai Deepak provides a reason for why we are going so deep into the differences between the decolonial and post-colonial schools of thought. He says it's easy to get confused between the two and make the mistake of thinking they're the same thing. Decolonial scholars claim that decoloniality is a state of mind, a thought process, just like coloniality, while post-colonialism is the general state of how things are. Coloniality की तरह decoloniality एक मानसिक स्थिति है, एक विचार प्रक्रिया है, जबकि post-colonialism सामान्य स्थिति है. We will discuss more details like this a little later on in our video series. For now, we move on to the topic of how the decolonial school sees and understands coloniality. The decolonial school believes that the celebration of the age of discovery by supporters of European supremacism is understandable. This is because in Europe, the Dark Ages existed for close to 1,000 years before the age of discovery. If I'm correct, this flew like a Brett Lee bouncer over your heads and you're googling the Dark Ages as we speak. Well, if you do, you'll find two things. The first is what the term means, which is the intellectual darkness that covered Europe between the fall of the Roman Empire and the 1400s. The second is a massive debate on whether this is true or not. However, in order to keep things simple and not have this video become a 10-hour long introduction to the different time periods of European history, we are going to try and understand what it means in this limited context. What the decolonial school is saying is that from the European point of view, the Age of Discovery was the start of extremely positive developments for Europe, especially when compared to how bad the previous 1000 years were for them. So, for people who believe in European supremacism, celebrating this period makes sense. On the other hand, as we have already seen, European history is not world history. Naturally, the rest of the world did not also live in the same dark ages that the Europeans were living in before the 1400s. Therefore, it is sad to watch societies that were once colonized celebrate the Age of Discovery. It shows you how gullible or bhola bhala these societies actually are. Why is this the case? It shows that these societies have not even begun to understand the racial and religious supremacist nature of the Age of Discovery and the following periods of European history, such as the Enlightenment. Racial supremacism means that you believe your race is superior to all others, while religious supremacism means that you believe that your religion is superior to all others. These societies are ignorant or clueless about how the Enlightenment impacts their ability to judge their own history without the shame and moral standards it introduced in them. Decoloniality wants to free native culture and their worldviews from these dictatorial moral standards of European coloniality. Decoloniality स्वदेशी समाजों और उनके वर्ल्ड व्यू को यूरोपियन कॉलोनियलिटी के इन तानाशाही नैतिक मानकों से मुक्त करना चाहता है. All that we have discussed so far make up the basic beliefs that shape decolonial scholarship or decolonial studies. When we discuss a region or a country's experiences with European colonialism and coloniality, keep these beliefs in mind. It is these fundamental beliefs of the decolonial school that demand your attention. Understanding them is important for decolonized societies that are still wrestling with coloniality. J Sai Deepak notes it is interesting that Latin America is the origin for the scholarship of decoloniality. This region has contributed a lot towards understanding and responding to coloniality. Its influence is so strong that a lot of decolonial scholarship, that is written material on decoloniality, is focused on the Americas, namely North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The other major area of focus after the Americas is Africa. Asia is home to living civilizations and native cultural systems. They have survived not just European colonialism, but many other forms of colonialism as well. Precisely because they continue to survive, they have become the main target of the modern day avatar of coloniality, that is Western imperialism. Given all of this, you would expect countries in Asia to be leaders in the field of decolonial scholarship. The Asian voice is important as it would lead to further widespread acceptability of the field. And yet, this is not the case. Asia is not a leader of decolonial scholarship. J Sai Deepak asserts that this shows the existence of a quote, deep-seated, continuing and unconscious coloniality in Asian societies, end quote. उनका मानना है कि यह एशियाई समाजों में गहरी बैठी, निरंतर और अचेतन coloniality के अस्तित्व को दर्शाता है. this is despite the fact that Asia has managed to preserve its cultural systems. He says that this is because of how dominant the post-colonial school of thought is in Asia and the Middle East, especially Bharat and Palestine. When it comes to literature on Asia that deals with analyzing coloniality from a decolonial point of view, one will notice that it seems to mimic the style of decolonial literature on Americas and Africa. This is true even in literature that very specifically deals with how Asians see and understand coloniality. People from different continents can share similar experiences of colonialism. This is because no matter which country of Europe the colonizer came from, most of the time they had very similar aims and actions. The coloniality that provided the base for these aims and actions was also usually very similar. However, this should not have stopped people from Asia from writing about the diversity and the unique characteristics of their colonial experience. After all, it would have contributed to the still growing pool of decolonial thought. J Sai Deepak says that it is time such efforts are undertaken, as these attempts are consistent with how the decolonial school thinks. Remember, this school shuns the universalizing approach to decoloniality. Therefore, having just one way of interpreting coloniality would defeat its own goals. In more complex words, decoloniality accepts and highlights the need for subjectivity, need for context, and resistance at the local level to definitions that are abstract and universal. Once again, Bretley Bouncer. So let's unpack this with an example. It won't be related to coloniality, but it will help explain the principles we just described. Ganesha is worshipped all over India. If I came to you and said that only my way of worshipping him is the true way, correct way, you would obviously disagree. Why? Because he is worshipped in different forms. My community may worship him as an unmarried brahmachari, but I'm sure for many of you this isn't the case. This is, quote, need for subjectivity, end quote. The explanation behind why my community worships him as an unmarried brahmachari but yours doesn't would be, quote, need for context, end quote. Lastly, your rejection of my claim that only my way of worshipping him is the correct way is, quote, resistance at the local level to definitions that are abstract and universal, end quote. These reasons are why the societies and civilizations of Asia can and must create their own definitions of coloniality and decoloniality. They should not allow themselves to be restricted or limited in any way by the experience and conclusions of the Americas and Africa. According to J Sai Deepak, one of the reasons the Asian experience could affect the way colonialism, coloniality and decoloniality are understood is because in huge parts of Asia, faith systems that are pre-colonial in nature, that is, older than the colonizer, still survive. Their survival in countries like Bharat, for example, make them, quote, living indigenous civilizations, end quote, or Jeevit Swadeshi Sabhyataye. This is not the case in Americas and Africa. In the case of the Americas, almost all the countries of the continent have been converted to the religion of the European colonizer, that is Christianity. About half of Africa too has suffered a similar fate, and J Sai Deepak says that nearly 40% have converted to Islam. J Sai Deepak says that the reason this makes a difference in the scholarship of decoloniality is because while the school is aware of the religious origins of European coloniality, it seems to focus mostly on the racial side of things. A reason for this could be that the decolonial school comes from a region where the societies that were colonized have become almost 100% Christian. The region we are talking about is the Americas, of course. In other words, the reason decolonial scholarship focuses so heavily on race but doesn't approach the topic of religion with the same level of honesty could be because the region that has produced a lot of the scholarship on decoloniality so far follows the religion of the colonizer, the religion being Christianity. He says their demographic reality could offer an explanation to why they are more alert to issues surrounding race than they are to that of religion. Very simply, it's because reclaiming their native religious identities, what we would call Ghar Wapsi in India, is impossible. This is the case even though their societies have started their journey of decoloniality. In the Americas, there are a lot of people who are descendants of the settler colonial population. Settler colonialists are basically the people the colonizers brought over from Europe to set up new towns and cities in their colonies. As you might have guessed, this population was Christian, and by extension, their descendants or Vanshaj today are also Christian. Because there are so many of them, it is simply not possible from a numbers perspective for the native population to revert back to the faith of their ancestors, that is, do Ghar Wapsi, even if they wanted to. On top of this, it is important to remember that Christianity is highly organized and is evangelical in nature. Evangelism is what we in India would call conversion. Christianity is also a religion that is a global majority. These factors have a strong impact on the ability of any non-Christian society that had once been colonized to reclaim its original identity or return to its roots. All of what we just discussed is what the book calls these complex realities. So, these complex realities could help explain why decolonial scholarship focuses so much on race rather than both religion and race. According to J Sai Deepak, in some ways we could treat critical race theory as the predecessor or purvadhikari to decolonial thought. This is probably why the scholarship on coloniality is so focused on race. Now I know some of you have heard this term before and are freaking out, so relax and have a sip of water. Away from the politics surrounding it, critical race theory in its most basic form is a study of the relationship between race, racism and power. All of this does not deny the growing scholarship on coloniality that looks at Christianity and its role in European colonization. However, J Sai Deepak says to the degree that he has read the literature on coloniality, a huge amount of it continues to avoid the issue of religion except for the work of a few scholars. This could be due to how hesitant critical race theory was to engage with religion as a topic. However, because of how new decolonial thought is, the Asian, but more specifically Indian perspective could address the topic of religion within the scholarship of coloniality without being scared off by it. This is because unlike the Americas or Africa, Asia has managed to keep its non-Christian character alive. Due to this, Asia's everyday encounters with coloniality in the modern world is, quote, in a way representative of European coloniality's unfinished business in Asia, end quote. There is active local resistance to coloniality and its evangelical motivations by the native faith systems of Asia and in particular Bharat. This makes the study of coloniality relevant and important to the continued existence and survival of these faith systems. J Sai Deepak says that he believes societies in Asia and the rest of the world have a lot to learn from the American and African experience with coloniality despite their hesitation to discuss the role of religion. This is because when it comes to European colonization, the aims and methods were similar. They were only limited by local conditions and how much resistance different indigenous or native societies offered. At the very least, these experiences from the Americas and Asia provides modern-day Asian societies with a good enough starting point in their own original journeys of decolonization. J Sai Deepak says that it is important Asians ask themselves if the decolonial approach is a better approach than the post-colonial approach for their societies. This question will be discussed later on in the video series. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this explanation video. Please consider liking and subscribing if you want to see more of this content. Until next time, Ram Ram.